An ATM Operators Association says that more than 1 lakh ATM counters could be shut down if tighter rules recommended by the Reserve Bank of India are not amended. The Confederation of the ATM Industry claims that hardware and software upgrades mandated, coupled with new cash management standards and cassette swap methods, could make the business unviable. Let's welcome in K. Srinivas, Director at the association, who's joining us on the phone line. Thanks so much for joining us, sir. Sir, firstly, can you tell us, what is bothering the industry most? Because there are 2 or 3 different issues. One is the cash logistic new norms that the RBI had suggested. The other is the upgrades that were required to ATM. And at the backdrop of all of this, perhaps, is that utility rates for ATMs are not growing as fast as they have in the past.
So essentially, there have been a couple of guidelines which have come via RBI as well as Ministry of Home Affairs regarding the physical security of the cash movements, which is they've suggested usage of cassette swapping as a method of replenishing cash, plus of course the increased security measures, the physical security measures, which obviously cost a lot of money. Number one, and number two, there were also some cyber security measures in the form of upgrade of the operating systems, as well as implementation of EMV and so on and so forth. Now, all these things do cost money. Now, obviously, the operators who are actually expected to put up all these things need to be compensated, because for the entire industry, this actually costs us upwards of anywhere around 3,500 to 4,000 crores. Now, unless it is we get remunerated, unless we get reimbursed of these costs through a mechanism of interchange increase, it is obviously not going to be viable for the operators to be incurring these costs. So I think the industry's ask is to relook at the interchange. The interchange rates, by the way, haven't gone up in the last 5 years. It's been at 15 rupees for a cash transaction, 5 rupees for a non-cash transaction for the last 5 years, while the costs have been continuously going up. I think our ask is, if you don't sort of find a mechanism of reimbursing the operators, how are operators expected to bear these huge incremental costs?
Okay, let me separate some of these issues, sir, because I know they're getting clubbed together. For instance, if you look at the norms of cash transit, the armed guard, etc., that has to accompany, that they have now put in place. Also, this cassette swap thing, that you have lockable cassettes as opposed to just replenishing existing cassettes. Don't the banks bear this cost, sir?
Yeah, there are 2 aspects of it. There are ATMs which are actually, which bank owns or bank outsources them to third-party operators, where the banks are turning around and then telling the third-party operators that this is your problem, this is something that you will need to comply because you signed a contract. Obviously, banks are turning out and then saying that we got nothing to do with it. If you want to comply, go ahead and comply. So the banks are actually expecting the MSPs to bear these costs. The second aspect is there is a segment of white-labeled ATM operators. The white-labeled ATM operators, they don't work for any bank. I mean, their only source of revenue is interchange. Now, if the interchange doesn't go up, there is no way of defraying these costs. So therefore, it sort of affects both the parties, because banks are taking a certain stance in one particular case. And in the case of white-labeled ATM operators, they have no one to go. I mean, unless interchange goes up, there is no way that white-label ATM operators can bear these costs and continue to roll out ATMs. In fact, that's one of the reasons. These are the reasons of non-viability, because of which, in the last almost 2 years, you see virtually ATM rollout has having come to a standstill. The reality is that you need a lot of ATMs in the small towns and semi-urban areas, villages, etc. But the rollout is just not happening, and we believe that this is going to hamper the entire financial inclusion program at some level.
Sure. But okay, so what about the underlying economics of ATMs? Because as far as we know, with sort of digital money picking up in a bigger way, say the utility rates per ATM seem to be coming down, or at least are not growing as fast as possible. Can you give us a sense of, say, rural and urban? What are the break-even points and where we are at compared to those break-even points?
So, if you really look at it at global level, if you really back off the demonetization period of about 6 to 8 months, the transactions at the ATMs are growing. I mean, today the cash in circulation has reached almost about 20 lakh crores. and the transactions done by retail consumers at the ATM points has only gone up. So I don't think that's the demand is a worry. However, the supply side is not happening because the economics are not making sense. So while digital will continue to grow, we believe cash has come back in full circulation. And especially as you go into the small towns and villages, the entire economy depends on cash. So over there, unless you go and put up more ATMs, we've given out a lot of debit cards through PMJDY, the Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana, and then there's a lot of money now going. All the subsidies are now going in the form of bank transfer. And if you don't, so the demand is there. If you, on the supply side, if you don't put more ATMs, this whole program is going to come to us. But if you want to put more ATMs, obviously it needs to be a viable mechanism for the operators like us who will need to sort of put up ATMs.
All right. Just last question, Mr. Srinivas. Where are the negotiations at? I know you've sought relaxations from the RBI, but surely you see the regulators' interest in ensuring maximum security. Perhaps the solution lies in some sort of an agreement between banks and the ATM industry, or maybe some attempt from the government to subsidize part of this, because it's very tough to argue that you shouldn't have tougher security at a time of rising frauds.
No, I think, none of us is saying that some of these measures which are announced are not required. I think they're definitely required. But there is a cost of putting those, measures in. And I think people will have to bear the cost. I mean, you can't expect operators to bear these costs and then be happy about it. It's obviously because it's not viable. So we've reached out to RBI, we've reached out to NPCI, we're reaching out to the Ministry of Finance. And we hope that some solution actually is, coming forward in the near future.